Good meowing every nyan. Today I want to have a quick chat about everything that changed with 7.2, the Dragoon changes, the overall melee balancing, and also the new gear that got added for Dragoon. Starting with the Dragoon changes, we got a 20 potency buff on Stardiver, which is nice, and then we also got a 20 potency buff on Heaven's Thrust and Drake's Bane. This one is slightly more interesting because it does have some rotational effect, which is that previously when we would use Life Surge on Chaotic Spring, because in some situations, I'm not going to go too in depth, but there would be cases where we have to choose between Life Surge on a unbuffed Heaven's Thrust or Drake's Bane, or a fully buffed Chaotic Spring in our 2-minute window. This has technically now gone from being a very slight potency gain to being a very slight potency loss, although this doesn't actually matter because in any realistic scenario, you're going to have one or more rate buffs, which will push it to still be a potency gain. So it's still something you're going to want to do unless you have 0 rate buffs or unless you are parsing. Technically, if you are parsing for our DPS in particular, then it's not necessarily optimal for you to do this. The total damage gain for Dragoon is pretty much 1.0% on the dot for our single target full uptime DPS output. This is relatively in line with the other melee DPS buffs. Some of the weaker jobs like Reaper got a slightly bigger buff. The one that really stands out is Samurai, which got a buff of over 2%, basically entirely in their 2-minute burst window, which means that it scales even more heavily with rate buffs on top of that. But since Samurai was quite weak beforehand, I don't think it's going to be anywhere near enough to make them broken or anything. As it stands, the melee DPS are incredibly well balanced, so much so that I honestly don't even want to look at the other roles because of how much of a disaster they are. For super high end stuff like speed kills, I believe that Monk itches slightly forward to being pretty clearly the best melee DPS in almost all scenarios because Monk doesn't have a super clearly defined weak point in terms of kill times. The only thing that Monk really struggles at is super long disengages where 6-sided star doesn't cover it, but that really shouldn't happen, but we'll see. And then alongside a Monk, he would just bring anything out of Dragoon, Ninja, or Samurai. Reaper and Viper still have a pretty good niche as well though. Reaper is super strong when you're able to bring full resources into a phase, so much so that unless they change its kit, making it stronger than it currently is would just make it so overpowered for those phases that it might be problematic, which is quite reasonable. Viper has a similar niche with how much gauge it can hold, but it also has a very easy time dealing with disengages because it can keep uptime from further away. So yeah, to summarize, Monk is just overall really strong right now due to its tools like Mantra and its high damage output. It's just generally the best melee DPS at the moment. Dragoon, Samurai, and Ninja all really come down to preference and stuff like kill time. And then Viper and Reaper have their like situational niches where they can do things significantly better than the other jobs. But generally speaking, they're gonna be the lower performance still in like full uptime single target stuff. Another big change that happened that isn't reflected in Dragoon's own patch notes is a lot of changes to fall off damage reduction for all the other melee DPS. So all of Ninja, Monk, Reaper, and Samurai saw pretty significant changes to how much damage they lose from hitting a target after the first with certain AoE skills. A lot of these are skills that they use in 2-target scenarios. Some of them aren't, which is really confusing to be honest, but I'm not going to go in depth on that. Generally speaking, what seems to be the idea and what was written is that they're trying to target phases like through phase 4, where there's 2 targets, and currently the job balance is very awful on those where certain jobs are getting so much more value from having multiple targets than others, where for these short phases it just becomes so imbalanced. And if they want to keep adding phases like this, which historically have had very low DPS checks, through phase 4 had almost no real DPS check, at least in a good comp, right? Which is fair because it's much harder in a bad comp. DSR phase 6 didn't really have an awful DPS check. Top phase 2 was, a bit on the rougher end, but generally speaking, these have never been too bad. If they want to start adding proper DPS checks, then it makes sense that they really should fix the 2-target job balancing. So although you could see this as job identity for something like Dragoon, I'm completely on board with trying to normalize this damage. That is also the reason why Dragoon and Viper probably didn't see any changes while all the other melee DPS got buffed, because Viper currently gains the most from stacked 2-target cleave situations, whereas Dragoon gains very close, well, not even that close. Viper gains a lot of damage from cleaving, but the advantage that Dragoon has is that it still gains a lot of damage from cleave scenarios, but it also gets to do so when the targets are not stacked, because we can still do double dot rotations, and we can still potentially cleave Nostrand, Gearskogel, and Wormwind Thrust. Moving on to the topic of gear, there isn't too much to say considering the way the gear is in 14. Here you can have the 2.5 BIS set for the new patch using augmented Tome gear and raid gear. This is the best gear you can have at the moment. You can go ahead and share this with your static spreadsheet or whatever to make sure that you are planning on getting the right gear. And this is the set that's recommended for progression. We're using our tomes from the current week and upcoming week on the earring, because we have to replace the crafted earring, which has skill speed. And then we're also getting the ring, because currently the ring is giving us a little bit more DPS value than the gloves would give us, which are also part of our biz. We are also going to get the normal raid boots, because we also have to replace those which normally have skill speed, the crafted alternative. But we don't want to spend our tomes on the boots, because the tome boots are not part of our biz. So buying the tome boots would delay our biz. It is, however, a DPS gain instead of buying the ring to get the tome boots. So if you are a world racer, or you're very particularly worried about clearing, day 1 or ASAP, and you don't care about what happens afterwards, there is a set, which is this one, which will also, all of these sets will be in the description, of course, which has slightly more DPS as the set is listed for week 1. It is very possible that maybe you get the gloves, or you get the boots to drop from the second fight. If you were to get those boots, then it's better to not have this set. But if you've planned things out and you've decided that this is what you're gonna use, yeah, this set is slightly better. Lastly, I also want to make a very big mention of the Tome weapon. So the Tome weapon in current day is only 500 tomes for an incredibly big DPS gain compared to, well, for this tier, it's gonna be the extreme weapon which we're using. And because Dragoon doesn't really need that many tome pieces for our biz this time around, there's a lot of reasons why you might want to consider getting the Tome weapon. The reasons why you might not want to get it is because you're playing in PF, or you're playing in the static and you're not sure if you're going to be able to get the materials for it. In which case, then yeah, you might be screwed. But outside of that, if you're worried about parses, which realistically someone who wouldn't want to do this because they want to get biz ASAP, the most common reason is going to be because they're worried about their parses. But if you're worried about your parses now, then obviously all of your percentiles are going to be better if you get a Tome weapon now for, week 1, 2, 3, 4, until whenever you would get your raid weapon. And even once you've got your raid weapon, if you then want to, if you want to have your biz and then just start crit farming immediately, realistically, in order to get the best possible parses, you're gonna want to wait until everyone in your group has their biz set, because everyone's gonna contribute to the kill times and everyone's gonna contribute to your battle at any value. So if you start parsing before other people in your group have biz, then you're realistically just never gonna have the same runs that people are gonna have a week or two later anyways. And because Dragoon is on the lower end in how much time it takes us to get our tome pieces, there's really no reason to care that much about delaying your biz by a week, unless you just want to be done with the tier. If you want to be done with farming gear for the tier ASAP, then yeah. But outside of that, I would really heavily recommend that you consider getting the Tome weapon. It's honestly a pretty good deal, and although I'm going to be playing in PF myself, if I do get the materials for it, maybe week 2, maybe week 3, then I'll probably just pick it up, especially because the raid weapon might take me 8 weeks to get raid. That's gonna be everything for this video. I didn't really plan this out too much or script this or anything. I'm honestly quite busy with work at the moment, and I had to, make sets for the balance, and do all kinds of stuff. So hopefully you enjoyed this still. If you'd like to see more of these kind of videos when there's patches, when there's changes, and if you'd like to have a little bit more explanation on BIS and recommended gear paths, then do let me know, and I'll definitely make this again in the future. Until then, I'll be making definitely more videos for the Savage tier. Hopefully this time around I'll make proper POVs and optimization examples and explanations on all 4 of the fights. And yeah, like and subscribe. Love you. Have a nice day. Bye bye.